Welcome, everyone. I'm Gideon Tolman. I'm the Financial Officer at the State Department of Education, and thank you for participating in our second of our series of facilities funding webinars. In our first webinar, we had a high-level overview of construction methods and management from Wayne Hammon, who's also here today, of the Idaho Associated General Contractors. And today, we're going to get into more specifics around building maintenance, construction, renovation, and long-term planning. Our presenters today are Ryan Bowman, Operations Director for the Twin Falls School District, and three Idaho construction managers, Anna Sparrell with CM Company, Bryce Parker with Beniton Construction, and Michael Arrington with Starr Corporation. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted on the Department of Education website so that you can refer back to it, or for folks to watch who weren't able to join today. And please feel free to put questions in the chat as we go along. And Ryan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Appreciate this opportunity. I do want to put this out today as I talk about maintenance and some best practices. I don't have all the answers. I know we all do it a little bit differently in each of our districts. Some of us are large, some are small, but these are some of the things that we have found beneficial for us in the Twin Falls district when it comes to prevention. And so today I just want to talk a little bit about preventive maintenance and some of the things that go into that, and some of the things that we've found to be that's provided success for us to stay ahead of the game. So you want to go ahead and that next screen, Gideon. So the why behind prevention and doing preventive maintenance. So first of all, there's three things that we believe that are good to understand. A good preventive maintenance program accounts for all your building components, your mechanical components, your electrical, your structural, and as well as your site components. It helps keep an accounting of those, how they're functioning, and so it's a good way to account for those things. The second aspect of this, around the why, is it helps you to assess conditions of those different building components within your schools. Some of you may have one building, some have multiple buildings, but it really helps you to assess those conditions within your buildings. And the third thing is that provides, a big reason is provides opportunities for you to stay ahead of major problems. There's always going to be failures of systems. There's going to be problems, issues, but this really helps eliminate some of those unforeseen issues when you are practicing preventive maintenance. So with that, what should a plan include? This isn't an all-inclusive list of aspects of a good maintenance plan, but these are some of the things that we've found that have been very beneficial. And the first thing to include is, as I talked about earlier a little bit, was an inventory of these building components. Things such as the age of your building, or age of the components within your building, even the age of your building, how it's being used, the condition of the equipment, looking at your HVAC, your asphalt, your roofing, and knowing, you have a good idea that particular roof that you put up has typically a 30-year lifespan or a 25-year lifespan. So it helps you to know when those things need to be replaced or taken care of. It also allows you to plan for inspections, to take a look on a yearly basis. Some things are more often than that. Sometimes on even a monthly basis, to look at some of those components and to assess them and see how they are functioning. Another thing that we feel is important to include is a schedule for routine maintenance and also standardization. For example, in the Twin Falls School District, we have a schedule with our heating and air units to replace filters at certain times of the year. It's something we do every year. It's not, oh, we pull it out and go, oh, it looks okay, we'll put it back in. It's just something that we do to make sure that, you know, you spend a little money up front so that you can avoid spending big dollars that are unplanned. So we look at filters on our heating and air units, for example. We look at belts on motors. We replace them before they break. You know, we look at different things as we inspect those. So we have schedules. Take a look at that. We look at lighting. We look at our floors. I think most districts have schedules on gym floors and their hallway floors that, you know, summer months, sometimes some districts I know will redo hallways during Christmas break and the summer as well. And so there are schedules that you can put in place and it's routine, and we do it and we take care of that. It also allows us to prioritize. You know, your plan should have prioritization. Some of your systems or your components need to be replaced. For example, you have some potholes in a parking lot, but you have a HVAC system that's failing. You know, where are you going to spend your money? Obviously, you have to keep buildings heated in the winter, and that becomes, you know, sometimes you have to look at your critical assets. Where does our limited resources need to be spent and used? And so it's good to prioritize and make sure that you have all those things in place. And another aspect that we've found to be very successful and very important is to have a work order system. A work order system in our district is used for our scheduled maintenance, as well as things that come up, a custodian sees at the end users. A classroom teacher may hear something squealing as air is being blown into the classroom in the middle of the winter. We can take a look at that and fix it before it becomes a big problem. And so having a good system in place for work orders, we feel is very important as well. So, you know, probably the biggest reason why, some of the biggest reasons why is, number one, it allows us to stay ahead of problems. Problems are inevitable. There's going to be things that are going to happen that are unexpected, but we believe that putting forth the time to do inspections, to have routine maintenance, will help us stay ahead of those major problems and having to spend money when we weren't ready to spend the money and it wasn't in the budget. And it also, by taking care of it, just like your car, changing your oil on a regular basis, it extends the life of schools. They're huge assets that we have. You know, they're worth a lot of money, and it costs a lot of money to build a school today. And so take good care of it. It really extends the life of our facilities. Think about some of the buildings that I've seen throughout the state. I know we have some of them in our own district that were built, you know, we have a couple buildings that were built in the 1930s. I know there's buildings around the state that are older than that. And so it becomes very important to maintain those facilities, custodial responsibilities, mechanical issues, structural issues, so that we can continue to use them in the foreseeable future. So with that, that's what I have for maintenance, and appreciate the time.
Great. Thank you so much, Ryan. And I don't see any questions in the chat so far, so I think we'll move right along. Let me stop sharing this screen and then pull up the next one. Okay, Wayne, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thanks, Gideon, and thanks everybody for joining us today. I thought if you saw my name on the agenda again, you would run away, and so I brought reinforcements with me today. We actually have 3 experts that really know this business really well. That are going to do most of the talking. I'm going to kind of MC it, but we're going to let them do that. So, Gideon, if we go. Our experts today are Anna Sparrell, the CM company. Anna's an owner at CM. CM, I think, stands for Construction Management.
Correct.
They're you're like the 3rd or 4th generation of owners at CM? Second.
Yeah.
So they're headquartered here in Boise, but they do work all over the state. I see their people in Pocatello all the time. She's a past president of the Idaho AGC. Next to her is Bryce Parker. He's one of the owners of Beniton Construction. They're in Meridian. Also been around a long time. Do lots of school work, lots of public work, in addition to schools and other public buildings. Bryce is on the agency board of directors. We call him a future president of that, and a past president. Bryce is now on the board. And then here, next to Bryce will be Michael Arrington when he comes back. He had to step out to take the call. Michael's with Starr Corp at Twin Falls. They also have an office in Pocatello. Starr Corp, I know he's the 3rd generation owner there. They do a lot of private work, but also school work and public work all over the South Idaho. They do a little bit of work here in the Boise Valley, quite a bit of work in Pocatello, but mostly in the Twin Falls area, they do quite a bit of work there. So I'm going to let them do most of the talking. Our agenda today is we're going to spend just a few seconds talking about what we talked about 2 weeks ago, and then we're going to go into the quality-based selection. We're going to talk about CMA or CMGC, who, what, when, how you could pre-qualify contractors. That was a question that came up quite a bit in our earlier presentation. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time on that as well. So quick recap of last time. There are 3 basic ways to construction, and this is both new construction and repair and maintenance that you're hiring a contractor for. I want to make sure we talk about that. When we say construction, we're just not talking about new schools, because we know that a lot of the districts, especially through this funding mechanism, will not necessarily receive enough money to build a whole school. Some of you will, hopefully. But we're hoping that this goes a long way in meeting your facility needs. Design, bid, build is the traditional system, and I would refer you back to the Department of Public Works' presentation from 2 weeks ago. They did a great job covering the design, bid, build, and I would get us putting that slide deck up on the webpage. They covered it really well, and I think that's probably what most of our officials are the most familiar with. It's the traditional, have something designed, put it out, the lowest bidder get it. I would just remind everyone that there are two paths forward in that, option A and option B. Option A is where you hire the lowest bidder, and option B is where you can pre-qualify contractors. So even if you want to keep the design, bid, build method, and it makes sense to do that in a lot of cases, you can still pre-qualify people so that you make sure that you get the right contractor for your needs. And not everyone is aware of that. It does take an extra step, but you're totally within your right, especially if you have a history of getting a low bidder that you don't necessarily want to work with again. There's a way around that. And it's not cheating. It's in there for a specific reason, because cheapest isn't always best in every case. There's also a design build, and DPW went through that as well. This is where you hire the whole team in one contract. We're going to get in about the quality-based selection for most of the day, because that's what most of the high-dollar school construction is being done this way. And we're going to go into each one of these bullets in much more detail when we start talking to the contractors. But there are 2 options. There's the CM agent and the CMGC, and we're going to explain what each of those means and how they're different. We're going to talk about when you use this for repairs and maintenance, when you use it for new construction. We're going to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of each. Some of the advantages are that by engaging a construction manager early in the process, you get their expertise and guidance as part of that. If you use the CMGC option, you can lock in a guaranteed maximum price. So if you're very budget conscious, and I think every school official in Idaho is very budget conscious, you can lock in a GMP. And then we're going to talk about how you do the contracting and all those things. So that's a busy slide, but we're going to go into each one of those a little more in detail. But before we get started, I have a side question. Michael, now that you've joined us,
Wayne.
what's the difference between an RFP and an RFQ?
I'll take RFPs and RFQs for 5 minutes. Okay, so this is likely the two things that get misused and interchanged the most, is what my experience has been. And it's just a minor thing, but we really ought to understand it. So as you can see it there up on the slide, it's got some points. When we're looking for a request for a proposal, you typically, as a district or owner, already have a scope out there, and you would say, I want a proposal to provide a new sidewalk or new roofing. And so then with that, you would provide a price, you would turn it in, that is your proposal. In looking for a team member to be a construction manager or a design professional services, you are doing what's called an RFQ, or request for qualification. And in that, you really are looking for a team member that meets the requirements that you have, maybe has built things that are similar to what you're trying to build, and is a good fit with your team. And it really has nothing to do with, part of the discussion is not what do you charge or a proposal that goes with it. It truly is looking at what qualifications are. And so that really is the one, or really the main difference. The one is a set scope of work that you're providing a price to do that work. The other is setting forth the qualifications, things that you have done, and maybe stating why you would be a good fit to be part of that team.
So let's use your roof example. So I have followed the advice, and I have a maintenance plan, and I know that the roof on this school needs to be replaced every 28 years. It's year 27. I want to hire someone to come replace this roof. That's the job. I probably do RFP, and I put it out for bid, right? Let's say I have a 50-year-old school, and the roof's leaking, but I don't know why. I don't know what HVAC system's up there. It may be that there's an engineering problem. That's probably when you're going to do more of an RFQ, where you're going to want someone to come in and help you design the scope. Is that correct? Is that a fair way to say that?
Yeah, I think so.
Absolutely.
That's really well.
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions about that? We'll move on. Gideon's watching the text box for me.
Yes.
All right. So in this quality-based selection, now we move on to the RFQ. Options. What I love about this, the way the law works, is it really puts the owner in charge of choosing their own destiny, their own path forward. So we're going to spend some time diving into both of these in greater detail, but we're going to talk about what is a construction manager agent and what is a CMGC, and then we're going to talk about when you hire them for a specific project, like my roof example, or you're building a list to work on multiple projects. And so the next slide, I think, is what is a CMA? Why consider it? Now, Bryce, Beniton does a lot of CMA work for people. What is a CMA? What do they do? Why would a school district consider hiring a CMA to help them with their project?
Well, I think in general, I think we could talk about construction manager specifically. You're looking to hire a partner. You know, we're coming to the table with a lot of experience. We've been very fortunate to do a lot of school projects, and we've seen a lot of things throughout a lot of different districts. Every situation is unique. Districts approach, their maintenance and their construction different ways. They have different expectations for what they're looking for. And I think getting a construction manager on board, whether or not it's CMA or CMGC, it gives you an opportunity to have somebody that's your advocate, that's coming on board the team to kind of help you navigate through the projects that you've got before you. And we all know that can be a tremendous challenge at times. So specifically with the CMA, we are construction management agency. We are your agent, so we would work with you throughout the entire process of the project or projects, through pre-construction, which we'll get into more, which is a really important process. And then when it comes time to contract for the project, we remain your agent. You hold the prime contracts versus us holding subcontracts. So there's really a contract delivery method that's really the primary difference there. But I think in both cases, we're your advocate. We're loyal to the owner. We're there to help you through that process.
So there are districts that don't have a full-time dedicated facility staff that maybe haven't done, they've done repair work and stuff, but they haven't done big construction for a while. They might not have the expertise do that. The CMA could help bridge that gap. Be a consultant, help them manage that. Then we have districts like Twin Falls that have hired CMAs in the past, even though they have a great big staff. But the example I think of, you had like 4 projects going on at once, right? And there was a CMA that came in to help coordinate the schedule and to hold the meetings to make sure the GCs were all meeting the deadlines, and you worked on that project. Helped brief the school board.
Correct.
So I think that there's a role there, whether it's a big district or a little district, just depending upon what you need. If you're West Ada and you've got 15 people, or I don't know how many people West Ada has working in school construction, but there are a lot. It's a big district. My kids go there. You probably have a CMO on staff, but if you're Blackfoot, where I grew up, chances are you might need some help, because that's what that is for. We talked about the main difference just a little bit, and it's the contracting, right? And that's the main difference between the CMA and the CMGC.
Yeah, and I think it's just also where the risk lies, and also the control over the procurement process. So if somebody has a very specific way they want to go about procurement, you have a little bit more control under the CMA delivery method, but you also hold a little bit more risk. And so there's kind of a cost-benefit discussion there. I think if you have a good construction manager, both systems work really well, and can facilitate the need. But that's kind of, I think, the main difference as far as the cost benefit. Disagree?
Yeah.
Okay. There's Bob Gideon.
Yeah,
All right.
great.
So whether you're using a CMA or a CMGC, there are a few steps we're going to go for how you would use this process. And again, doesn't matter if you're building a new school or if you're doing repair and maintenance or a HVAC overhaul. We think you'd probably follow the same system. And step 1 is build a winning team. I cannot stress enough how important it is to get the right people in the room at the very beginning, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So we think there's at least 3 areas that you have to look at when you're putting this team. First, you need the elected school board members. Now, if you have them all, then you constitute a quorum, and every meeting is a thing. But you need to remember that at the end of the day, the school board is the one who is the decision-making authority. But for me, being that I didn't grow up in construction, I grew up in politics, these are the folks who understand the political nature of it. And every school construction project has a political nature in it. Why did you fix that elementary school and not my kid's elementary school? Why are you, why is it purple instead of green? Anyway, so having them on board really early is important. But we also think it's essential that professionals be there as well. The school board members have a lot of responsibility for a very part-time job, and they have other businesses to run. But having your superintendent, your facility managers there, and I think, I'll ask them, but I think, this committee, all votes are equal. I have the opinion of the facility manager is just as important as stay-at-home mom who got elected to the school board, for different reasons, but they're equally important. And I think as well, equally important is the end users. You want to talk to your teachers, you want to talk to your janitors, you want to talk to the people who are going to live in this space before you get down there and design something that they just don't want. It's really important if you're going to avoid it wrong to get the team together. Now, who has a good example of this, or who has a horror story of when the team wasn't put together right?
Well, I mean, we could all probably speak to that. I think what we appreciate, and every district is set up so differently, like we've been talking about, every situation is unique. You've got some districts, smaller districts generally, where the superintendent's going to be very involved from day one. And you've got some situations where you may never see the superintendent involved in the project at all. And, both work fine. I think the facility managers, Ryan sitting here at the table, are just a huge part of that. But there's always different characters within the administration of the school districts that may have experience in that regard. A lot of the rural districts, you've got, guys salt of the earth. You got farmers and stuff that are involved in the school board, and they've got good knowledge, and they can bring a lot of questions and discernment to the table. And I think we just appreciate having them engage and giving us as much information, as they can about what they're really trying to accomplish, so we can help them get there.
And I think we're going to talk about this a little on the next slide, but to me, one important thing here is that this team is going to steer the process from beginning to end. I've heard horror stories of where the professional staff, the superintendent and facility manager did steps 1 through 6. They're the ones who put out the RFQ, they're the ones who graded it, and then they brought in the school board for the interviews, and it turned out the school board had a very different opinion of what the administrators thought was important. And so the administrators were looking for commitments on delivery and scheduling and budget, and the school board was more concerned about the aesthetics or what is the school going to look like, or how good the PowerPoint presentations were. So I think it's important to get all those players at the table early, and that the same players go all the way through. That if you're going to have a teacher's representative help you design the project, well, that teacher representative should have a vote in picking who the winner is. That is my opinion. Eventually, the school board is the legal authority that makes those decisions, but they should consult with this team all the way through.
Well, and I think it also makes, or helps it be consistent with the decisions that are made in the early stages, so it doesn't get changed throughout the design or the construction, because that's when things can get really costly, and there's good reasons for why things were made early on. But if you don't have that consistent person involved to explain some of those decisions, and sometimes it can start to flip-flop, and that's when you kind of get into trouble.
It also helps sell the project, right? Eventually, we're going to have to go out and ask taxpayers for some money or something like that. And being able to have a team who's bought in, they can get up at those meetings and say, well, this is why the wall is green instead of blue. And this is why we made those decisions. Because, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say that second point there, district operations and maintenance staff, is a critical one not to be overlooked as well. Sometimes leadership in the building doesn't realize a few of the things that are wrong with the building, because the maintenance staff is can-do, make it happen folks.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, our HVAC system's great, but, okay, you have to push this red button, and then Billy goes over and does this, and then once we do that, it cools great. Or, this roof is awesome, and these buckets are our plan for, and it just, we're a can-do, make it happen folks, right? Generally, these folks that are in those positions are, and so they may not have mentioned some of the struggles that they're having, and so to have them at the table and inviting them to share those unique situations like that can help identify things that need addressed in the building. Yeah.
Yeah, and even keep them involved throughout construction too, because they're gonna remember like, oh, it's our job to see some of these things, but they'll see it from a different perspective, making sure there's clearances so they can get in, making sure that there's, a lot of those things that they have continual problems with once they take over the building, but keeping them involved.
Right. Yeah, and they have that opportunity while you're building to walk through when all the piping and electrical and everything's exposed, and they can understand how the building is put together, and helps them be able to diagnose things in the future.
Yeah, super. All right, step 2.
And can we jump in with a couple of
yeah,
questions?
sure.
So we've had a couple come in. So one is, would there be a reason to have an owner's rep if you're using the CMGC model, or if you are using a design build model with a CMA?
You can, I don't think it's necessary in those cases. I feel like the CMA, or CMGC delivery method are both set up to make a collaborative team between the ownership, the design, and the construction team. And so through that, I think you don't necessarily need the owner's rep position. Now, if there's not somebody from the district's perspective that can facilitate that role consistently, or just doesn't have the time or capacity to do it, then maybe. But I would hope that, or at least I feel like our role is to kind of take some of those burdens off of the district's plate when we're playing a CM or CMGC.
And we'll talk about this as the CMGC. There's a reason there's a hyphen or a slash to this, because the first part of it, you're acting as the CM, similar to what the CMA role would be. And then once construction starts, they shift to the GC, and the fees are different and the structure is different. So having a CMA on top of that may be a little duplicative, but again, like Diana's point, if there's really nobody in the district that has the ability to dedicate time to doing it, then you might want that. But otherwise, I'd say use your contractor, use your CM.
Yeah, I think, there's the owner's rep services that aren't, characterized as a construction manager. I think if you're in a situation maybe to help manage a design team and maybe put something out more for hard bid, if you're looking for somebody to help kind of manage that process, it would make more sense. But your construction manager should be your owner's representative. I mean, if you're hiring the right firm, they should take care of that service. You shouldn't need that extra layer.
Thank you. And then one other that came in, so I started a 5 to 10 year plan last fall. I had a long-range facility plan completed by Rich Boucher in February in our district, and he presented his findings at our April meeting of what areas need focused on. We're not building new buildings in our districts, but our plan is upkeep of current buildings. Will this report be sufficient moving forward with these projects on our list? And maybe, Spencer, do you want to?
Yeah, likely it will. And we're still working out, fleshed out the details and requirements of that, but components of that is what you'll need for sure.
And then I think this is a continuation of that comment. Is it correct that every district will need someone to survey all their buildings and see what needs to be fixed with this facility money? I just want to make sure our LRFP will work since it has been completed in the past month. It runs from 2024 to 2034.
So in summary, those, the new one and the old one will integrate nicely, so it won't require really much additional work.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, I think
Okay.
that's it for now. Let me move to the next slide.
All right, so once you get the team put together, you put them to work. That makes sense? And here's what Anna was talking about: ensures consistency and builds advocacy for the final project. I also engage the designers and contractors early. Why again, I know we've stressed this already, but why again do you think it's important to get that team established early and get the CM or the CMA or the CMGC on board so quickly?
Well, I think, the earlier we're involved, the earlier we can be in, or help with cost estimating, we can help with constructability questions, we can help analyze what really even needs to be done. I mean, part of the quality-based selection is that, you know, you don't necessarily need to have a defined scope to go out for a quality-based selection. We can help you figure out what are the biggest and most necessary needs right now, right? That can be part of that whole benefit.
Yeah, and I don't think we can be hired early enough. We've talked about the entitlement processes and things we've got to go through with jurisdictions, having the design team have enough time to be able to design the building, you know, or the renovation to react to any jurisdictional requirements. You know, if you're having to do anything in roadways or whatever it may be, if you drive around the Treasure Valley right now, you see how many road closures are everywhere you drive, and you know, you may be delayed because we can't close the road for another several months because this other project's going on. There's just so many logistical things that we can help navigate early on, and I don't think you can hire us too early.
And we can give you information for decision-making purposes, right? Like maybe you're looking at 2 or 3 different systems and you want to know the cost differences. We can help provide that information so you can make an informed decision.
We just bring such a different perspective to the table, and it's very traditional to hire a design professional early, like, and it is becoming much more common to hire a construction professional early. And I think both of us working together, we just have different perspectives, working to accomplish the same goal, but different perspectives. And if there's not someone at the table looking at each of those different perspectives and what needs to happen, you'll miss out on some opportunities.
I think about that in the last one, or 2 weeks ago, not the last one, but 2 weeks ago, the architect speaker talked about how he designs a school and all the processes you go through. You have those bubble diagrams and stuff. That's all very, very valuable stuff. But at the end of the day, it has to be constructible. So before he gets far down that road, you want a construction person in there saying, that is a great idea, but code requires the wall to be this thick, or the code requires outlets here, 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 or, you know, and they should know that, but also they get to a point of, well, you got a skylight in the middle of the science lab, right? That's not going to work, those types of things. So, okay. I think we're on step 3 now. The schedule. Mike?
Yes.
How do you put together a schedule?
The magic 8 ball.
I get told all
Loaded
the
question.
time, contractors are always behind schedule, nothing's ever done on time. How, if you could build a schedule, how would you do it?
Back to you can't hire us too early.
Exactly. And that's exactly right, Bryce. You can't hire us too early. There are so many things that we can bring our experience to look at things that we need to be looking at way ahead of time. But really looking at what your expectation is and then backing into it to see if it's possible, right? like, we have all met with people that have expectations that don't align with the budget that they have, and sometimes it's schedule driven, you know, summer gets shorter and shorter, it seems like, the summer break, and
As the State Department of
needs to
Education
happen.
requires more education days, at least less time for us to do construction.
Man, I messed that one. Anyway, don't worry about that. But, no, really getting in, and there's gonna be an interview process. We're likely gonna ask you some questions that you don't understand what that even has to do with the building the schedule. Especially if it is a phased construction and what that, we're gonna ask about constraints of where in your building can we work and where can we not during school hours? Are there other places that students and staff can go while this is worked on? What is that? But there'll be, during that scheduling process, there's gonna be an interview to understand what it is you need, what your expectations are, and then we'll back into that. And likely there'll be a few options of how to get that. We've met with schools that wanted to do a phased approach, and it was going to be, 13, 14 phases, which can be done. But then part of our job during that was to say, if you could find a way to not occupy the school, we could do it in one phase, we could do it faster and for less money. So those are some of the things that are gonna be happening during that. But there'll be an interview, there'll be a lot of questions, and then as as construction professionals, we'll go back and put a schedule together and perhaps even present you an alternate plan or a different schedule that meets many of your goals that may then offer some things that you hadn't even considered.
And that comes into effect, I have on here, material availability and delivery, that type of stuff. We just did some work at the building the AGC owns, and the HVAC system we wanted was like 36 months out. So we chose the one that was only 18 months out, right? And so I had no expectation, as the owner, I had no expectation going there that I was gonna have to wait a year and a half for an air conditioner. But I did. And that was a more expensive one that came from Germany than the one I had originally picked, because I could get it in 18 months. I couldn't have designed a schedule without the construction professional helping me do that.
Well, I think it's also, the design process just takes longer than you might think, they're trying to get, in order for them to do a really good design, they wanna get feedback from the stakeholders, which takes meetings, which takes programming, which, that all it's a process, right? And I'm not trying to knock the architects, it just takes some time to do that. And so I think that's often underestimated, coupled with the fact that, authorities having jurisdictions also are taking longer to get through the permitting process. And so it's important, and this is where the CMA, CMGC, if we're able to potentially go out for early bid procurement, things like that, while that process is occurring, so we can get those units ordered while we're still figuring out parts of the design, that's where we can really start to benefit the project as well. That's why we want to be a part of your team during that design phase.
And those design reviews and permitting processes are just taking longer everywhere in the state. It's just, there's so much construction going on, and city and county government, even the state government where they do it, are so understaffed. It just takes a lot longer now to get building permits and design reviews and inspections. It really does. Okay.
Just to recap, I can't think of a time when we were invited in, we're like, oh, you asked us to come way too early.
Yeah, never wondered.
If it's something that is a few years out, let's talk about it. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So step 4 then is to actually do the RFQ. And these aren't functional links, but Gideon has these documents. He'll put them on the webpage next to the slideshow. But Michael has helped us prepare a sample advertisement and a sample RFQ. And we're going to go through we're not going to walk through each of these documents, but the documents exist. But on the next slide, we're going to talk through the elements of them. Okay. What factors, Michael, when you're putting the RFQ together, what do they really need to look at?
So this that you'll be given as a sample helps with a skeleton outline, but it's important to identify things with your project. That RFQ process is going to be better and better serve your district if you'll give it a little bit of thought. Really, you should ask slightly different questions if you're going to be remodeling existing buildings, or building a new one. It's a different skill set that you're looking for, different experiences. The same company will likely possess both, but it gives a chance for a company to show some successes that they've had in those items. So those kind of things. It's important to identify if you do have specific scheduling requirements, what they are, or specific phasing requirements. Sometimes funding mechanisms would be there, or if you expect your construction manager to attend city meetings and help with different things like that, it's important to express what it is you want. As you look at that RFQ, it will provide some basic steps that would apply to most any project, but it's important to look at and identify what you believe the unique characteristics of your project is what I would say.
Yeah, it's your first opportunity to communicate with this team that you're gonna be working with for, depending on the period of time, it could be 2 to 5 years or something. So, take that first opportunity to communicate as clearly as you can. In every case, you can't define the scope extremely clearly, but you have expectations and basically what you're doing, bullet out, as many of the items as you can, and then you can help figure it out from there once we're on board.
Yeah, and I think the questions that are in the RFQ that Michael's talking about are really standard questions that we see, and they're great questions. But if there's a way to tailor them to your specific issues, it's just going to be more valuable for the districts as a whole. And remember, you're often going to be reading anything from 5 to 10 responses to these, so it's important to actually want to read what you're going to be spending the time doing, because they can get quite lengthy. So, for your own sake, I would say, make sure that it's tailored to your
I think
district.
on the next slide, we have a few suggested questions. These are the factors for a great RFQ. Then the next one is questions. Avoid unrealistic parameters, right? And we expect a report every Monday morning. You're going to pay for that. I'm going to have to hire someone to do that, right? I think the second one, eliminator, goes to Anna's point. I've seen RFQs where they basically ask the same question 5 different ways, right? Tell us about your experience. Tell us about the project you're the most proud of. Tell us, it's basically the same question, and they're asking it over and over, which means you as the owner have to read that response over and over and over again. And so if you can go through each one and make sure they're essential, make sure they're unique, and then as Anna said, focus on what's important to you. We are I'm trying to think, the Potlatch School District, and we use wood-fired heating. That needs to be in the RFQ right up front, so people know that if you have an expectation that something's going to be done a certain way, that it's going to be upfront. Anything else we forgot about? So I think the next slide is the questions that we came up with. Here's some good questions for you to. Oh, no, we've skipped that part. Never mind. Oh, you know what? The questions are in the interview section. All right.
Yeah.
So you prepare this document, you publish it. The law tells you how you publish it, and how many times you publish it, and how you open them, and that kind of stuff. But once you get the responses back, the selection process typically includes scoring of the written response and an interview. But you don't have to do an interview, but you can. There are have-tos, though. When you're scoring the project, and this is laid out very specifically in the code, the scoring has to be done in writing. You can't just meet in a room and vote, raise a hand. It has to be, each member of the team that's reviewing the document has to complete a score sheet. It has to be a numerical score. In the past, before this law was changed, we saw public entities use smiley faces and frowny faces. And the more smiley faces you got, the higher your range. That doesn't work anymore. We also saw people do check marks or pluses and minuses. Can't do that anymore. You have to use them. Now, you can choose a score. It could be from 0 to 1. It could be from 0 to 100. It could be whatever system you design, but it has to be a numerical score so that we can compare each of the respondents to the other respondents. The other thing you have to remember is that these scoring sheets are public records. And so once you're done with the process, you have to make available the scoring sheets so that all the people, all the requesters, anyone off the street can come in and see them. They're public records that have to be maintained. A thing that I would stress is that while you're going to score on several factors, and there's in the example that Michael provided of the draft RFQ, there's actual scoring criteria. that you might consider, but not all criteria are the same. And so I'd encourage you to weight that and put things that are most important to you, give them a higher scale, right? Because, like I think we said a couple times, any good CMA is gonna be able to do the basics. But what makes this particular candidate stand out should be what's the most important to you.
Yeah, that weighting is part of that communication to kind of help us understand where we really need to focus, providing you with the information about our experience and bring to the table.
One question that came in, does the scoring rubric need to be set prior to noticing the RFQ?
I don't know if
Most of them include it.
Most of it-
included in it,
Yeah,
but
most
not-
of it's included.
Most of
it's
it?
included.
I'll have to check the law before you get in. I would say,
strong recommendation that
Strong,
it is part
it
of the RFQ.
You don't know how to it
Yeah.
helps us respond much better if, in the sample, and then you can adjust it as needed, it is part A gives a few questions, and then it is 5 points possible, or whatever.
Best practices.
And this is B, and then this is worth 10 points, and then each reviewer gives it anywhere from 0 to 10 points. And so, that, I have never seen it published separate or different. It's always been,
Yeah.
I have not personally seen one that was published,
After the fact.
right,
Yeah.
it was always as part of the RFQ.
Yeah, I think I have too. I don't know if that's like a law, but I think
Right.
I've always seen it with it.
That's what yeah.
Yeah.
Best practices, I think, is one of you guys.
Yeah. And one other that just came in an RFP, in an RFP, pricing needs to be the highest weighted factor. Is it the same in the RFQ where pricing isn't a factor in the determination?
yeah, we're gonna talk about that. It's actually not allowed to be one of the factors. So, you're not going to include it, as one of the factors. We're gonna talk about how the pricing works, in just a minute. That's like step 7 or 8 or something. But, yeah, you do not actually include price as one of the scoring sheets at all.
And part of that is oftentimes you don't even know what you would be pricing, right? So it's
Right.
kind of impossible.
Because you're
to
hiring them so
price.
early, there's no real blueprint yet. There's no real, we know this is the scope, or we're trying to define the scope. The pricing's a little different, but we'll talk about that in just a minute.
And one other really quickly, how do you have a GC on the planning/startup committee if per district policy, you have to send projects out to bid above $100,000? I understand the RFQ helps eliminate the ones that won't perform the best on the project, but if there are 3 qualified companies, how do you have a GC on startup before a price point is made or bids are submitted?
I think that's a good question. Maybe we confuse that earlier. When we go back to step 1 of building your team, your GC or your CMA is not gonna be a voting member of that team, right? And so that team's the one that's gonna design this RFQ and put that stuff out.
But then after that, you're going, so then your team kind of morphs into the design, construction, and your ownership team, right? So that kind of is how the team changes over time once those other entities are hired. So we've used team a little bit interchangeably, but the quality-based selection would be how you would select that CMGC for that team, if that makes sense.
Generally, they call it a building committee or facilities committee or something to that.
So you're not gonna have, we started about bringing them on earlier, you're not gonna have them under contract until after you go through the RFQ process. They're not gonna be in the room helping you select.
But there still will be, to answer her question, or their question, there still will be a hard bid process later on, after the design is completed, where we still do introduce the competitive nature and meet that requirement for the district. It's just, maybe, it's more based on quality for the CMA selection.
Yeah.
Hopefully that answers.
Yeah, and we'll cover that too. In the bidding process, once you get them hired, they're gonna put out the scope of work for bidding for all the subcontractors and materials, and that then meets their requirement that everything has. All right, so, you're gonna get 10, 12 of these written responses, and then you're gonna decide how many people you wanna bring into interview, and again, they're not required, but we highly recommend it. Why, from your experience, why do you think the interview is so important?
I don't think there's any substitute to getting in front of, a proposed team, to get them in front of your building committee or your school board, your administration. These are folks you're gonna work with intimately for, you know, a number of years. And I think until you get in the room together and can have a presentation and have a conversation and get some questions answered, and, you know, I don't think there's any substitute to that face-to-face environment.
Make sure you allocate enough time for the contractor to come in and, give a presentation. They typically introduce you to the team. This is the superintendent who'll be working on your building. This is the owner of the company who will be helping lead the process. There's the CM that will be your primary contact. But also, if you have questions, you should send it to Brandon. This is where the questions are.
Yeah, many times, you know, you'll have, like Anna mentioned earlier, 5 to 10 responses to a RFQ, and then generally you're gonna shortlist that to some amount, you know, if it's 2 to 3 people, whatever it may be, that you would interview. And then I think there's kind of a follow-up process after the RFQ where, hey, you've been shortlisted, these are interview times, and then kind of provide some additional questions that you may have. We don't need to have everything, but it's nice to have some of that up front so we can prepare a little better for you, just so that time is used wisely.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's your opportunity to really kind of meet us and understand who we are, what we're about, and so use that opportunity to, you know, feel good about your decision in the end.
Can I ask you one other question that came in? We already have a schematic plan with some specs and a price, and we use an RFP and procurement process category B to evaluate price and the quality criterion for the interview and scoring process to select a.
So I think what you would end up doing is, if you already have a schematic and specs, then yeah, you could use category B to pre-qualify a list of contractors, and then have those contractors hard bid on your plan, right?
But you would still kind of lose out on the pre-construction. I mean,
You
to me, the downfall of that method would be that you're losing out on that pre-construction process. And I think that's where we can really provide some valuable insight on what maybe is another option, or maybe what we may feel is a better way to approach something, that could save time and money. But yes, you absolutely could do it that
If
way.
there's already sunk costs into the design, though, is what I'm getting. If they already have a
But
schematic plan.
They're only a schematic.
So it's
Schematic,
not fine.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, yeah.
No,
Yeah,
they're
schematic's
very
the early
early.
phase.
They're not far enough
So,
down the road
yeah.
that it's a
Yeah.
truly sunk cost.
So any price or budget that would be put towards a schematic design is gonna be conservative in nature, probably have a lot of contingency tied to it, so.
I mean, even if you're in the construction documents, early construction document phase, there's still benefit to bringing a CM or CMGC on board, because again, we're just able to get in, look at the budget, see if you're within the budget, and you're still able to make some modifications to that design to meet the budget needs or the schedule needs, early on before you're out to bid, and then all of a sudden you're over budget, and now you're going back to the drawing board.
But
And so
Gideon,
there's still benefit
I
there.
guess the answer to the question is yes, they could. That system would work. But our recommendation would be to use the RFQ process instead of the RFP.
You said helpful, thank you.
Okay.
Okay,
Super. All right, so now you're gonna bring in 2 or 3 people for an interview, and I think we put in some suggested questions you might consider during the interview. Explain your proposed approach. I think that's what Michael was getting at earlier. We talked about phasing and that kind of stuff. What is your approach here? What is your philosophy about construction? How do you go about tackling a project like this? And that's important to know. What schedule concerns have you identified? Now, you, as the owner, has kind of worked out a schedule, and you've included that kind of in the RFP. The contractors will be able to tell you, now I look at your schedule, and I just want to let you know there's not enough room here for this. Or, we can really speed this process up if we do it this way, that type of thing. That may be an important factor to you. I mean, these are buildings that are used heavily all year long, even in the summer months. And so the scheduling is super important in any type of school construction. A generic one that we see a lot is share your past experience projects similar to ours. They may have built 5 giant high schools, but they've never done an HVAC replacement like what you've seen, right? Or they only do new construction, they've never remodeled a 1930s building. And you're gonna wanna know that. This is your project. What have you done that's similar to us?
Yeah, we're somewhat limited, generally within the RFQ. You know, we'll have a certain number of projects that we can highlight, whatever it may be. In the interview, it gives us another opportunity, and I think it's given us that feedback when we're shortlisted to drill down into something that maybe you're more like, hey, let's talk more about these renovation projects, you know, specifically where you were working on a school that actively had kids there all year long and how you handled, you know, the separation of the construction workers and the kids, or just allows you another opportunity to get more information that may be pertinent to your set of projects.
I always, when I'm interviewing for hiring people, I always ask tell us the difficult challenge one. So I threw that in as well. I think you learn a lot about a contractor by asking them to explain a difficulty they overcome. And then you start saying, oh, what if we had something like that? And you can see what sets them apart, to me, what sets you all up, is your ability to adapt and change. And some contractors do that better than others. And so to ask them, how did you have to overcome a difficult one, I think is a good starting one as well. Okay, what's next? All right, so now you've read all the responses, you interviewed your 2 or 3 stuff, you make your selection. And this is when this conversation shifts from who's the most qualified to who can we afford. Right, and hopefully they're the same thing. But the way the law is set up, it's the same if you're hiring an architect or almost any professional service, is you pick the most qualified, and then you enter into negotiations with them on their fees. And this is where you can ask them about budgets and fees, and you can ask them for past examples of fees. You can ask them for their fee for both the construction and pre-construction phases. And Anna, you were talking about that before. How does the pre-construction differ, and how are the fees in the pre-construction phase usually handled?
Yeah, generally a pre-construction, if there's pre-construction fees on the job, then,
And not all of them do.
not all of them do. And it's more likely to have that on a CMGC job versus a CMA job. Do you agree?
Yeah, oh, I think in both cases.
Yeah. But, generally on the pre-construction fees are more of a time and material basis. So you're paying for actual amount of hours that we're spending on it, at an established rate. Right, and then we track that and submit those on a semi-regular basis, whether that be monthly or quarterly, however people want to do it. But there's usually a cap. Usually we'll say, okay, there's, you know, the maximum amount of pre-construction services that we'll charge on this project is whatever that value may be. So you know what your overall exposure is. Doesn't mean you're going to reach that cap, but you know that you can't go above that cap. So that kind of helps establish that there's not an open checkbook.
Yeah. And the contractor could come in and say, you know what, I'm gonna bill you $750 an hour for every hour I spend on your project, and you say, look, we're only doing $250.
Yeah.
Or we're only doing, that's why it's called a negotiation.
Yeah.
It's
right.
not, oh shoot, we picked this person and now we're stuck with whatever they wanna charge us. It's a negotiation, and everything in life is negotiable, right? And so you work out what you agree, and you can say, all right, we're gonna pay a little more per hour, but we're gonna lower the cap. Or we're gonna, you know, there's all kinds of ways to format this, to make it so that, again, that you just don't, they're not entitled to an open checkbook.
Yeah, and it's all based, again, on the scope. You know, some are very clear. You're adding on a wing to an elementary school that's this many square feet, and this is our budget. So right up front, you can kind of get, you know, a pretty clear set fee figured out, and makes it pretty streamlined. But a lot of times, it's not that clear.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
And there could be some where it's like, we want you to attend the school board meeting once a month.
Mm-hmm.
We want you to do 4 public meetings. Those are all time and factors that the people have to figure into, especially if they're traveling and that kind of thing. Okay, get in. During construction, for the CM, there's normally a management fee. This is the right?
Yep.
And then, all the material subcontractor pricing is done after the design is done. So we go back to that requirement that they bid things out. So you've hired a construction manager, general contractor. They then work with the design team and the owner team to get the design, the construction documents ready. Once they're ready, they're going to go out and bid that just like they would a traditional method. The difference is that in the CMGC, they get to pick, that is, they're not obligated to pick the lowest bidder, but they have to show the school district why they did it. If they don't choose the lowest bidder, they have to have a justification. And the owner has the right to be as active in that process as they want to be. If they want to say, no, we're willing to take the risk and hire this guy, then you work that out with your CMGC.
The other thing to note is under a CMGC, you are able to self-perform, where that can be a major factor is in smaller rural districts where it may be difficult to find specific scopes of work. There's also the new law. Do we have that somewhere else in here?
No.
Where, as of, I guess, July 1st, you can have a non-public works licensed contractor work under a CMGC up to $100,000. So the benefit to me, what that means for especially rural districts, is that allows us to get maybe some of the local trades involved that may not have a public works license, and it may not be worth it to them to get a public works license. We can solicit to them and bring them in and work under us and get them involved in the process as well. So I think that's another really good benefit to the CMGC process over the CMA. And it's really helpful in some of the more rural areas where you just don't have the manpower that you have in a large.
So we have a real example of that. For example, we have a contractor who's doing remodeling of a courthouse down in southeastern Idaho. And there are plenty of electricians in that community. They're all licensed electricians. They're all very qualified to do the work, but none of them have a public works license. So he put out a request for public works license. The only response he got was from somebody more than an hour and a half away, and they were charging 4 times the normal rate to make the trip down there to do a day's worth of work. If the county, in this case, were managing that project by themselves, that would be their only option, because you have to have a public works license to work on a public space. But because they've hired a CMGC, and the CMGC's public work license will cover that subcontractor up to $100,000, he was able to then hire the guy on the street, the local guy, the guy who's already paying taxes in that school district, to come and work on that courthouse. Or he will come July 1st. And so there's a little cost savings there, but all that pricing gets handled at this stage, so that you know right up front what those costs are going to be. And under the CMGC model, all that then can get rolled into the guaranteed maximum price.
Yeah, and I think, further to that with non-licensed contractors, up to 100,000 is gonna be a great help, but there's gonna be a lot of scopes that are gonna go over 100,000 too, and.
I want to make sure we're talking about that they still have to have the license for their trade.
Yes.
Right.
So you can't just hire, the CMGC can't just hire anybody. They still have to be a licensed electrician, a licensed plumber, a licensed everything. But in Idaho, just because you have your license doesn't give you a public works license. There's an additional requirement to get a second license.
Right.
And the new law waives that additional requirement if the CMGC is willing to cover the liability for their work. And that, like I said, is going to be a huge help in rural areas where there are plenty of tradesmen that you probably want to hire because they're local, but they don't have the public works license for one reason or another.
Yeah, and getting that CM on board, it also provides you an opportunity. On a lot of projects, we've spent time, maybe a year or more ahead of the project, marketing the project to the trade community, and sometimes you've got to shepherd some of those guys through that process to help them get their public works license, so that you've got some good bid coverage on bid day, so.
Yeah. All right, so getting that question pops up, we're going to address in just a minute.
Perfect.
So don't let me forget, but we're going to address that in just a minute. Let's go to the next one. All right, this is what the question was. The question is, if the district put out an RFQ and has already done that, now they're going to have this 5-year plan under your new system. They have to do it again. There's 2 ways to do it. And this is done a lot over here in the Treasure Valley. I think the West Ada School District and Boise School District is their preferred delivery method. I'm not sure how much it's used elsewhere, but it's used here. What's the difference between the RFQ for a single project and RFQ for building a list of qualified contractors?
Yeah, I think the single project we've kind of discussed a lot, so I won't go into that, but building a list, it essentially provides a roster of qualified contractors that a district has selected, and then they're able to use those entities for various different projects based on how they see it best fits those contractors. So, you know, I know West Ada does this a lot, Boise School District does this a lot, and so they get to know those contractors that they're working with over the course of that 5-year period or whatever it may be, and they understand, like, who is the preferred person for a nasty remodel, who is the person that I want for a ground up, who has been doing all of these types of projects for me, or who do I want to work with on this, and who do I know would facilitate this need best for me, and they can kind of select that, but they've already gone through that qualifications process, so they don't have to do it every time a job comes up.
So the question to the answer in the chat is, yes, they're gonna have to do it again, because the RFQ is different. The RFQ specifically says they're building a list.
Right.
And so the RFQ they used to hire the CMGC for the first project, it cannot be reused. They're gonna have to do another RFQ specifically for building a list. The law requires that. It requires that all the bidders know that there's multiple projects. It doesn't guarantee anybody any work.
Right.
But it lets them know that there are multiple projects that may be there. The law was changed a couple of years ago to define that a list is a list, not a name. So it has to have at least 2 people on the list. There's a school district who remain nameless, who had a list of 1 person for a long time. That's not a list, that's a name. We have to have at least 2. Now, we also removed the cap. It used to be capped at 5 or something like that. The district can put as many people on there as they want, and to Anna's point, they may pre-qualify 10 contractors, but no, these are the 3 we use for this type of work, these are the 3 we use for this type of work. They can do that kind of stuff. The list is valid for up to 5 years. That was another complaint we got, was that the school district or a public entity went through this process and then it never reopened. And so it's now 5 years. Now, if it turns out that you want to cancel it early, you can. The public entity can cancel the list at any time, just have given notice. But the longest the list can be active is for 5 years before they go through the process.
And it doesn't mean that if there's a specific project that they want to put another RFQ out for specific to that project, they can still do that. It doesn't make them have to use these people.
That's right. They're not logged into that. So we built this list because we thought in our 5-year plan, we were only going to do these maintenance projects. Well, it turned out we were lucky and got a bond passed, and now we're going to build a new school. Right. Well, I want to do an RFQ specific to that school. That'd be fun. The good news is once you do this, then you can hire off the list without putting out RFPs. There's no notification required. You don't have to publish in the paper that we're hiring a contractor because we've already pre-qualified them. That's spelled out very specifically in the law.
And then at that point, you can sit down with, you know, 1 or more of that group and have those discussions as far as past experience, past budget,
Yep.
whatever it may be, and then make a decision.
Okay? All right, we're getting very close to the end. Oh, we're there. I hope that's helpful. It's a lot of information, but we detailed the slides so that when they're on the website, you can do that, and maybe go back and look at the recording. We have also the contact information for these 3 professionals that you can contact if you have a question you want to discuss offline. All 3 of them are very good at this. All 3 of them have been used by school districts all across the state. I recommend any of these 3 companies. And they pay me, but I'm not paid to recommend it.
Not a paid endorsement.
Not a paid endorsement. It's just because I've seen your work. I've been in the schools that these 3 people have built, and it's been very impressive. So.
Well, if it helps, we would recommend each other to other people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think one thing to add that I was thinking about is on the RFQ process, excuse me, I'm going to mess it up. For CM services, you don't necessarily have to pigeonhole yourself right up front either way between the CMA and the CMGC.
Right.
That's something that you can get a construction manager on board, and the different delivery methods fits different projects better.
Right.
And that's something we can help you make that decision. We can look at the numbers, look at the logistics, you know, whatever where we're approaching, and help you make that decision.
And this one that we shared with you addresses exactly what Bryce was just talking about. It leaves it refers to CM, and it allows latitude to go either way. If you've made up your mind, you could change it, you could leave it open to both. Like it's a template to do just what Bryce said. Absolutely.
Okay. I'm watching. I don't see anything else.
Yeah, I don't see any other questions. Any last questions from anybody online before we wrap up? And I'll say just a couple of things if you're still thinking about it, but just want to thank you all for being here. Thanks for presenting that great information, and thanks everybody online for joining as well. And I failed to recognize Spencer earlier. Spencer Barzy is here as well, and he's our Eastern Idaho Regional Director and the mastermind behind much of the facilities funding, planning, and process and implementation. And just as a reminder to everybody, the reason for these webinars is not only to share great best practices and things that we should all be aware of, but there are also certain requirements in order to get facilities funding out to you all, and obtaining some of this knowledge about best practices is part of that process. And as was stated earlier, these will all be posted on our website. We're not quite there yet with our webpage up and running, but Wayne talked earlier about the presentations or the recordings, and also the PowerPoint presentations. Those will all be made available on the website, and I will let everyone know as soon as that's up and running. And then as a reminder, our next facilities funding webinar is June 5th, which is also a Wednesday from 11 to 12. And we'll be joined by Wayne Muleman and Eric Herringer to talk about the bonding process for the $1 billion in facilities funding. And I didn't see anything else that came in, so I think we'll wrap it up. Thanks everybody for joining, and we'll talk to you soon.